introduce, it's my great pleasure to introduce JonathanHeiliger as our keynote speaker of today. Until recently, he was at Facebook. He was VP of Tech Operations at Facebook. He was at Facebook from 2007 to 2011 for 4 years. When the number of users, that is one metric that is used in that business, it went from 50 million to I guess 500 million. So that is more than 10x. The infrastructure and the applications and so on multiplied even more during that particular phase. And Jonathan was the person who was kind of making sure that the infrastructure keeps scaling and able to support this kind of stuff. I got to know Jonathan maybe 3.5 years ago. Several interactions. And I can say two things. One is he very clear and direct communicator, and that is always very nice. And the second thing is because he himself believes so much in openness and innovation, that first time when I was talking to him about open flow and software-defined networking, it was so quick that he understood the value proposition so quickly. It was almost like a meeting of the minds. And since then, he has been a believer, a champion of open flow and software-defined networking. He was one of the founding board members of Open Networking Foundation. And so with that, it's a great pleasure to have Jonathan come and talk about his perspective on open flow and SDN.
If only there was a virtual networking solution that could solve this problem. Awesome. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here and talk to you in a very direct and hopefully sort of open-minded fashion about open networking, software-defined networking, open flow, whatever we want to call it. There's a bunch of things that all, in my mind, kind of roll together, but all stand the chance to change this industry and really revolutionize the industry, which I think is a key word, and you'll hear me repeat it in a moment. But first, I wanted to point out, just because I was on the agenda as being part of Facebook, that I'm actually no longer with Facebook. I joined in mid-2007 and left at the end of September. And during that period of time, our users, the number of people that used Facebook grew from about 40 million to over 800 million on a monthly basis. And there's about 500 million people that use the site every day. So like a lot of you and like a lot of other enterprises, whether you're at a bank, or an oil and gas company, or a consumer internet company, we experienced a lot of growth. This is just a little bit about me. I'm sometimes called a rebel, sometimes called an investor, sometimes called an entrepreneur, sometimes just a guy who likes to stir the pot. And as Guru mentioned, have been involved in OpenFlow and the Open Network Foundation for about 2 years, and really just excited to see this concept, the set of concepts come to life. This is just a little bit of gratuitous Facebook action. Since I did work at the company, I thought I'd share it. This is my timeline, and that's a picture of Kaiser Soze, who's my dog. He and I, a couple of weeks ago, rewired our home network, and he was very good at crimping cables. But when he actually told me what he really wanted was his own kind of firewall, his own virtual network, and if he could only have that, he'd really love that. So I have to now download both the Big Switch and Nicira controllers and do some coding at home. All right, I'm going to hopefully go through this relatively quickly, but that should leave time maybe for a few questions at the end. I literally just showed up from the airport, so I apologize in that I'm not super familiar with how the other talks have gone. First, I just want to look a little bit at some of the scaling challenges we had at Facebook over the years. First, I'll take you back to 2007 when I joined. we thought we had a lot of users and a lot of challenges, and really we were focused on keeping the site up every day. And we continue to invest and really focus our investments in software engineering and in writing code that was not only products that users would use, but infrastructure to actually support those products. And over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, depending on how you look at the calendar, the pace of innovation has actually accelerated. The company has released dozens, if not over 100 products and contributed to many different open source projects, all of which I think speak to the importance of software in a business like Facebook or any other development shop. By comparison, I think Facebook has today about 500 people working in engineering, maybe a little bit more, 600 people. But by comparison, we're a small development shop compared to Bank of America or Fidelity or a large financial institution. So these guys ought to be contributing in similar fashions to us to the movement of open networking and software-defined networking. So all of this growth presented a lot of challenges. I'm just going to talk briefly kind of about 2 themes that I really think are intertwined today. The first is innovation, the second is how you leverage openness as it relates to innovation. So first, as I mentioned, we spent a lot of time innovating in software and building software. And I actually was going through on the plane sort of the list of projects that either were inspired by Facebook, instigated by Facebook, or that we contributed to, or that we borrowed from. And there were literally 200. And I was going to do this cool little animation and graphic, and it just didn't work out. But I think the key thing of this slide is actually what's not on it, which is the network is not on it, right? We've got a lot of innovation taking place in software and in our software stack. We did some innovation in servers, which I'll talk about in a moment, and also in data centers, which is another big piece of an infrastructure for any online services company. Generally speaking, infrastructure is the second largest cost of an online services business. Any improvement we can make there economically or efficiency-wise can have dramatic impact to the bottom line. This is the gratuitous logo slide instead of all of the projects, so skip past that. But so as we've built, as Facebook was being built, we always had this idea of building using open standards, open technology, and quite frankly, open stacks. And Facebook wouldn't have been possible without open source software. We couldn't have built Facebook on any kind of commercial software. It would have been too expensive, too confining, and too constrained. And so as such, we launched they, now at this point, earlier this year, launched a project called the Open Compute Project. And Open Compute really represents some innovation that we're pretty excited about, and myself included, since I'm still involved in the project, in the hardware realm. And this is what I was talking a little bit about in terms of innovating in servers and data centers. The Open Compute Project is the first of its kind, and it's open. It's a set of server standards, motherboard, chassis, planar, power supply, etc., as well as data center standards. But again, nothing to do with the network. We're getting there. We're getting there. This was actually kind of the first inspiration, the first design for data center. Just to me, I love showing this picture. It's Jay Park's napkin. It was the first thing he grabbed in the middle of the night when solving an electrical bus problem. And it just goes to show that more than .com businesses can be built on napkins. So as I said, we built several different components inside of the Open Compute project, really focused on servers and the data centers. We're actually taking a hard look at the role the network plays and the role infrastructure software plays inside of Open Compute. And there's an Open Compute Summit, I think, next week, and that's going to be sort of looked at and discussed further. So, as I said, these 2 topics were really intertwined, and fundamentally the message here is innovation is not possible without openness. And one of the things that I remember from my career about 12 years ago is we had this big debate. I was at a large telco at the time. It was based in Rochester. It's called Frontier Communications, and shortly thereafter was acquired by Global Crossing, for those of you who remember that period of telecom boom. We built a lot of networks, both domestically and internationally, and some were successful and others were not. But one of the interesting things was we faced this big debate inside the company. We had this decision, and I remember this vividly, and you'll see why in a moment. And it was, do we build an ATM network, this proprietary network? I think 4 systems wanted to sell it to us, or maybe it was Cisco or someone else. Fixed packet, not super flexible. We'd have to put IP on top of it. Or did we just build a native IP network? What were we going to do? And the preference of the company, we were sort of this, I got to the company by way of acquisition. The preference of the company was, we're telco. We want to use telco standards. We want to use ATM. It's a well-defined spec. A lot of other people are using it. This IP thing is new and crazy, and we're not really sure how to support it. We're not really sure how to sell it. We don't know. And so we spent a lot of time sort of building PowerPoint presentations and running analyses and bringing in folks from Cisco and other outside experts, and obviously talking to our competitors, guys like Sprint and AT&T and Quest. And they were having some similar debates inside of their company. Build a ATM or maybe even for a relay-based network versus an IP network. And it all came down to a game of ping pong for us. Spent a lot of time convincing the board and the management team that we needed to spend, I think it was $50 million or something like that, to build this network out of IP versus ATM. And the spread was, sorry, that was the total budget. The spread was maybe $10 million or something like that. And this long debate of what's the ROI going to be on that money? Are we actually going to be able to sell more products and services as a result? And the CFO and I ended up just sort of deadlocking. We couldn't break the deadlock. And at the time, there was a ping pong table outside in kind of our common area. And so we just said, let's play a little match. Whoever wins the match, that's going to determine the technology. You've always wondered how big strategic decisions are made. That's how it happens. Thank goodness we ninja'd that shit. That was awesome. So we convinced the company to build an IP network instead of an ATM network. And I think that was a pivotal moment for our business, as well as at the industry, as well as across the industry. But fundamentally, it's really difficult to see the future without a crystal ball. And if you rewind the clock to 1998, it was pretty obvious that IP was going to take over, but it wasn't guaranteed, it wasn't assured. Telcos and network operators are making the bulk of their revenues from selling virtual private networks on ATM, or totally private networks on frame relay services, not networks on top of the internet. There was no such thing as quality of service, or there was, but it was a myth. It didn't really work. But you could guarantee quality using these private networking technologies. And I think the interesting thing that comes out of that is IP was open. By virtue of us and all of our peers investing in IP, there was a massive wave of innovation that followed across the industry. Because all of a sudden there was all this dollars going into figuring out how to make IP work. Turns out we needed some other technologies. We needed things like MPLS or label switching and other kinds of things to be able to actually have quality of service or other types of controls across the network. And quite frankly, I think we're faced with a similar question and dilemma today, which is today we live in a world where it's constrained by firmware. It's not necessarily open, but it's very interoperable, very standards-based. I think the decision we're at today is how do we go from being constrained by firmware and really this evolution of the last 12 years, 15 years of evolving technology. It's getting better and better, more interoperable. Today, BGP actually works between multiple vendors, and OSPF works between multiple vendors. 12 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? You stick a Cisco box in your network and a Wellfleet box in your network, and you spend a lot of late nights trying to get them to talk, and you realize that they're actually totally incompatible. So we see, and I personally see, this as the next revolution in networking, not the next evolution. So we talked a little bit about, very briefly, some of the innovation that's happened in servers and storage, and just sort of think about over the last 12, 15 years, the amount of innovation that's taking place in the server domain. We used to have multiple microarchitectures in the market. Today there's fundamentally one dominant microarchitecture, x86. But part of the virtue of x86 is that it's interoperable with everyone. There are multiple vendors to both compete in terms of innovation and compete in terms of economics. But that same flexibility, if you will, doesn't exist in networking. We fundamentally have to buy technology from, as a user, from a vendor, from a supplier, integrate that technology, and build a layer or a wrapper around it in order to be able to control it. If we want to have a network management system, I have to figure out how to program my network management system to access the Cisco box versus a Juniper box versus some other third-party box. Having to do that work puts a lot of load on us as users, and fundamentally, I think we ought to change that. I think it'd be wonderful for the users to be able to control their own destiny rather than having to accept what's built for us. So, as I mentioned literally 7 minutes ago, we've been involved with the ONF for about 2 years, and just wanted to just give you the direct reasons why. And it's pretty simple. We're really excited, and I'm personally really excited about open standards. Anything that I can go in and touch or be able to influence and control fairly easily. That gives me a lot of flexibility, and it gives me a lot of comfort as a user. And that's something as a user, whether it's as a website operator or as a large enterprise IT shop, really motivates me. The second is that all of the participants are motivated to interoperate. They have, by virtue of being sort of driving and defining an open standard, all of a sudden the motivation to interoperate goes way up. Because I know that I can't be successful on my own as an island. I actually need to partner with all of the other people in this ecosystem. And I think one of the really interesting things about OpenFlow, the specs continuing to evolve, and I think we're on the precipice here of seeing the 2.0 spec, is exactly where are all of the abstractions and where are all of the APIs. How, as an application developer, can I not care or worry about the network, but I can just call an interface and send a packet down it and know that it's going to make it to the other end, and know that the quality is going to be assured relative to all the other traffic on the network. That's really, really exciting to me as a developer. Instead of, as an application developer, having to worry about what queue do I open, and what toss bit do I set, and how am I supposed to do this, and how am I supposed to do that, I don't want to have to worry about it. I want another intelligent piece of software to have to worry about it. And at Facebook, one of the things we spent a lot of time looking at is it was exactly that, being able to break apart the basic components, if you will, of being able to assemble not just a website, but an application stack. So to make it as easy as possible for product engineers to write product code, in our case in PHP, have a set of a massive and wonderful infrastructure team in place to not only scale the code, but optimize the heck out of it and make it truly robust and flexible, rather than coupling those things together. And that, I think, is fundamentally the challenge with today's networking technology. Is it's incumbent on the user to fully define and fully scope their intent when you're writing your application. You can't depend on the operating system to do just some magical amount of work for you. You have to tell the operating system specifically what you're trying to do and how you're trying to, and what the end result will have to be. There's a couple links to find a little bit more information, not only about Facebook's work in the software domain and in the hardware domain, and hopefully shortly more and more contributions to the ONF and into OpenFlow. Unfortunately, we haven't had the resources that we'd like to be able to dedicate to working on OpenFlow. There's a couple of guys here from Facebook on the infrastructure software team, and I know they're chomping at the bit and they want to do more, whether it's instantiating and writing services, or actually just simply turning up and testing different silicon vendors' switches using OpenFlow as a control mechanism on top of it. For us, it's been a bit of a resource constraint. So if you're looking for a large environment to do that in, you should think about helping Facebook, especially now that I'm no longer there. It's not even a recruiting pitch. That's all I got. Short and sweet. Happy to answer questions because I think we have a little bit of time.
Yeah, I think we have time for questions, so feel free to, and you don't get to have Jonathan on the stage to ask questions often, so.
Okay, Sergio from Orange, hi. What's the difference between ATCA and Open Compute? And the second question is, how the Facebook, if Open Graph Protocol, one day there is any relationship with software-defined network?
So actually, I can't speak to the nuance between ATCA and Open Compute. I think ATCA is more of a standard in the way of designing motherboards, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, thank you. So I mean, Open Compute is really sort of the designs that were inspired by Facebook as being very slimmed down, very focused on scale-out operators and people who are designing servers for sort of extremely low cost and operate in a data center, rather than having to be a general purpose compute node that may be used in a rack in one place and a cabinet in another place, or even on a standalone basis. It's really designed as an entire system, if you will, of standards. Your second question was around the potential maybe for the Facebook Open Graph and software-defined networking to be combined over time. Sure, potentially. I think the Open Graph protocol is really that. It's a graph protocol that allows you to not only access but walk social relationships between people and between objects in the graph. I think there's actually a lot of commonality and a lot of relationships to how networks work, whether it's via a centralized controller or as a distributed, a system, a la a routing algorithm or something like that. But I think one of the things that we thought a lot about was being able to, for example, just couple our application to the network. And so depending on the call type that was being made, whether it was via OG, Open Graph, or any one of our other number of systems, was to be able to couple them directly to that, not just the path, but perhaps traffic priority or queuing or those sorts of things.
I wanted to ask if you, if you put on your belt hat again today, like you were in Frontier several years ago, and the debate between ATM and IP. So today, if I draw an analogy, it may not be a perfect analogy, but just trying to make a simple one. Carriers today have switches and routers from companies like Juniper, Cisco, Brocade, etc. And a lot of them are offering future solutions that have some aspects of open flow, but are yet very proprietary, right? So Juniper is offering something like QFabric, Cisco's in its Fabric Path, and we can go down the list. And then you have open flow with merchant silicon and so forth. Do you see similar debates today in the telco community, or do you think it's years away before those types of the debates occur in terms of when to transition? How would you relate the timing of that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I personally don't think it's right around the corner. I think it's probably 18 to 24 months at a minimum away. But the interesting thing is I think the slope of the curve is going to be much, much steeper than it was when we transitioned from ATM frame relay S25 arguably into IP, which is a very long transition. And I think the nature, the motivating forces that are at play there are not only competition, but will be new services. And there'll be revenue opportunities for the carriers, for those network operators. And will also be just, I think the other thing I think about is N&I interfaces to customers. And then customers wanting to be able to maybe deploy services within sort of multiple sites or across multiple sites of their enterprise using a carrier in the middle. So I think that will be, as I said, sort of a much more rapid curve of adoption. But I think it's still a little ways away from where we are today.
Hi, I'm Steve Georges from Line Rate Systems. Hey, John, I'm curious to know do you see any intersection between software-defined networking and the DevOps movement? Do you imagine a time when you'd actually allow developers to be able to innovate on the network?
Absolutely. So, I think all of these things play off of each other, if you will. And by virtue of giving the developer not only more control, but better abstractions, I think you can end up building much more interesting and robust software much more rapidly. And one of the things that I think has allowed Facebook to grow as well as it has, at least from an infrastructure standpoint, was exactly that technique. And being able to break down what would normally be sort of vertical applications into simple components that could easily be sort of just like Lego bricks, reconfigured and re-glued together, depending on what the application developer needed to be able to do. And I think looking ahead, maybe it's a year or two or something in that time frame. I think one of the things that would be super interesting is to give that application developer that today is just sort of calling an object, from a database or out of cache, and be able to give them full control of the network as well.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Hopefully that was interesting.
Okay.